Alright guys, next chapter, Snozzcumber. Still working on that accent a little bit. It's a little bit of a struggle, but hopefully you're having fun with it as much as I am. Looking forward to kind of getting into the meat of the book so you can start guessing on some of the problems and what's going on. Obviously, one of the big problems is Sophie's been captured by a giant, so that's until that's resolved, we're not looking towards the end of the book, and there's going to be some roller coaster moments in here to be looking for, so here we go. But if you don't eat people like all the others, Sophie said, then what do you live on? That is a squelchy trickin' problem around here, the BFG answered. In this slosh-flunking giant country, Happy eats like pineapples and pig winkles is simply not growing. Nothing is growing except one extremely icky-poo vegetable. It is called a Snozzcumber. The Snozzcumber, cried Sophie. There's no such thing. Now, even watching the movie, I immediately thought of a cucumber, which is pretty close to what we're thinking about here. The BFG looked at Sophie and smiled, showing about 20 of his square white teeth. Yesterday, he said, we was not believing in giants, was we? Today's we not believing in Snozzcumbers, just because we happen not to have actually seen something with our own two little winks. We think it's not existing? What about, for instance, the great squizzly Scotch hopper? I beg your pardon, Sophie said. And the Humplecrimp. What's that? Sophie said. And the Raps Rascal. The what? Sophie said. And the Crumbscroddle. I'm sorry, Crumbscottle. Are they animals? Sophie asked. They is common animals, said the BFG contemptuously. I is not very know-it-all giant myself, but it seems to me that you're absolutely know-nothing human being. Your brain is full of rotten wool. You mean cotton wool, Sophie said. What I mean and what I say is two different things, the BFG announced rather grandly. I will now show you a Snozzcumber. The BFG flung open a massive cupboard and took out the weirdest looking thing Sophie had ever seen. It was about half as long again as an ordinary man, but was much thicker. It was as thick around its girth as a perambulator. It was black with white stripes along its length, and it was all covered with coarse knobbles. There's a little picture of it. Imagine how big the BFG is and how big that vegetable is right next to him. Just a little detail I just noticed. Way down in the corner, you can see Sophie looking up at it. Pretty funny. Interesting job by the illustrator. Here is the repulsant Snozzcumber, cried the BFG, waving it about. I squoggle it, I despise it, I desponge it. But because I is refusing to gobble up human beings like the other giants, I must spend my life guzzling up icky-poo Snozzcumbers instead. If I don't, I'll be nothing but skin and groans. You mean skin and bones, Sophie said. I know it is bones, said BFG, but please understand I cannot be helping it if sometimes I saying things a little squiggly. I's trying my very best all the time. The big friendly giant looked suddenly so forlorn that Sophie got quite upset. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't mean to be rude. There never was any schools to teach me talking in giant country, the BFG said sadly. But couldn't your mother have taught you? Sophie asked. My mother, cried the BFG. Giants don't have mothers. Surely you is knowing that. I did not know that, Sophie said. Who ever heard of a woman giant? Shouted the BFG, waving a Snozzcumber around his head like a lasso. There never was a woman giant, and there never will be one. Giants is always men. Sophie felt herself getting a little muddled. In that case, she said, how were you born? Hopefully you guys had the same question. Giants isn't born, the BFG answered. Giants appears, and that's all there is to it. They simply appears, the same way as the sun and the stars. And when did you appear? Sophie asked. Now, how on earth could I be knowing a thing like that? Said the BFG. It was so long ago that I couldn't count. You mean you don't even know how old you are? No giant is knowing that, the BFG said. All I is knowing about myself is that I is very old, very, very old and crumply. Perhaps as old as the earth. No, not way older than Mr. Finley. What happens when a giant dies? Sophie asked. Giants is never dying, the BFG answered. Sometimes, quite suddenly, a giant is disappearing and nobody's ever known where he goes to, but mostly us giants is simply going on and on like whistly time twiddlers. The BFG was still holding the awesome Snozzcumber in his right hand. How he put one into his mouth and bite off a huge chunk of it. He started crunching up, and the noise he made was like the crunching of lumps of ice. Yeah, it's filthy, he sputtered, speaking with his mouth full and spraying large pieces of Snozzcumber like bullets in Sophie's direction. Sophie hopped around on the tabletop, ducking out of the way. It's disgustrous, the BFG gurgled. It's sickable, it's rotsome, it's maggots-wise. Try it yourself, this foulsome Snozzcumber. This always reminds me of, not always, but this part reminds me of when somebody says, this stinks, smell it. Why would you want to bite of it after he said all of those things? No, thank you, Sophie said, backing away. It's all you're going to be guzzling around here from now on, so you might as well get used to it, said the BFG. Go on, you snipsy little winkle, have a go. Sophie took a small nibble. Ugh, she spluttered. Ah, gosh, help, she spat it out quick. It tastes of frog skin, she gasped, and rotten fish. Worse than that, cried the BFG, roaring with laughter. To me, it's tasting of clock coaches and slime wanglers. Another little illustration. Do we really have to eat it? Sophie said. You do, unless you want to become so thin you'll be disappearing into thick air. Into thin air, Sophie said. A thick ear is something quite different. Once again, that sad, winsome look came into the BFG's eyes. Words, he said, is such a twitch-tickling problem to me all me life. So you must simply try to be patient and stop squibbling. As I'm telling you before, I know exactly what words I'm wanting to say, but somehow or other they's always getting squiddled around. That happens to everyone, Sophie said. Not like it happens to me, the BFG said. I is speaking the most terrible Wiglish. I think you speak beautifully, Sophie said. You do, cried the BFG, suddenly brightening. You really do. Simply beautifully, Sophie repeated. Well, that is the nicest present anybody has ever given me in my whole life, cried the BFG. Are you sure you're not twiddling my leg? I feel like the author in this part of the book is really just starting to show that a relationship between these two characters has definitely started. And you can imagine that that's going to continue to grow. Of course not, Sophie said. I just love the way you talk. How wondercrump, cried the BFG, still beaming. How whoopsie splunkers, how absolutely squiffling. I is all of a stutter. Listen, Sophie said, we don't have to eat Snozzcumbers. In the fields around our village there are all sorts of lovely vegetables, like cauliflower and carrots. Why don't you go get some of those next time you're visiting? The BFG raised its great head proudly in the air. I is a very honorable giant, he said. I'd rather be chewing up rotten Snozzcumbers than snitching things from other people. You stole me, Sophie said. I did not steal you very much, said the BFG, smiling gently. After all, you was only a tiny little girl. Interesting title to the next chapter. The Blood Bottler. Too bad you'll have to wait till tomorrow to find out what it's all about. Good night, guys.